So we have a Generac GP3000i that we are going to do a pull starter replacement on. This is the pull starter rope that is no longer retracting because the spring's broken. So we ordered a new pull starter assembly. That part number for this is 100024691, and that's for the blower pull starter assembly, and this is what it looks like. So we're going to replace this whole piece. So in order to replace this piece, we're going to have to basically pull the housing off, pull the inverter, hopefully we can just tip it back, but in the end I do know we have to pull the whole housing off, and then we can get access to it to then replace this pull starter assembly. So this is the pull starter assembly that is currently on here. Customer was using it this way for a little while, and I'm assuming he was probably just turning this back by hand because of the spring broke in order to use it in the meantime, type of thing. I'll grab a little magnet cup there so I can put all these screws in. So now that can drop back a little bit. We're going to go ahead and pull this panel off. Set that aside and we'll flip it around. This one's already pulled off, but we got to take these screws out up here. And then we have a 10mm bolt here, and we have another 10mm bolt over here. Let me go grab a wrench for that. And that's the bolt for that. And do the same one here. And I almost forgot there's actually one more right here in the center on the bottom. Okay, so now that I got those out, there's no more screws along here. We're going to rotate this and do this side. We have a couple screws, one here and one here, and then we also have 3 screws or bolts down here that we got to take off. So we're going to go ahead and do that. First, I'll start with bolts. It looks like it's been in the mud. And then we'll take the screws out from up above. I need to get a little extension for that. So I can use my impact. go. Get that one out. And now, in order to pull these off, you also got to take the 6 screws off on this back panel here. Then we can pop that off. All right, so now that we got that off, we should be able to just kind of, oh yeah, that's right. There's usually a captured, okay, so up here, there's a little clip. You can kind of see there. That needs to get popped off. Hopefully I can get it on camera here. It's kind of hard to do it one hand. So kind of pop that side off there, and we should be able to work it off like so. Set that aside, and we're going to rotate this and then pull. So the screw that I'm talking about is right there. Right there is the screw. So to take that off, let me turn on my light here and unscrew that. And there we go. Okay, so now that we got that off, this charcoal canister off, I can pull this aside. I'm just going to put the screw back in its place, which it was right here. I'll set that in by finger and then set this aside. All right, so now we have access to everything. So what we have here is, this is the gas tank. I'm gonna take it off. I think it's gonna be the easiest. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to disconnect this part of the charcoal canister, and let's see. So pop that up a little bit, and that way that stays with that. And then the fuel line connects from the gas tank way over there to, from the gas tank there to this fuel valve right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a clamp here, take this fuel line off. That way I can pull the tank off without fuel just coming out of this fuel line, because that fuel valve will no longer be in place. So let me go grab a clamp real quick. So we'll clamp that down, and I can pinch that sometimes by hand and then work that off. All right, so now the whole tank should come out. We gotta snake it through here, and then we'll set it aside. Okay, so now that we have the gas tank off, you can now see the carburetor is here, air filter, the inverter right here, and then of course the front display. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this clip off here. We're going to disconnect this fuel line, then that will separate that, and then we're going to go ahead and pull this carburetor off, set it aside, and then we're going to go ahead and take off those bolts, and I think we should be good and clear. So let's go ahead and disconnect that fuel line real quick. Let me go grab a long wrench. So we'll pop this clip off here, and pop this clip off over here.
All right, feel better.
And now we should be able to pull this fuel line off. So you can see I just got the fuel line off. So now this is all free. So now the next thing, fuel line to the carburetor, that is. So it goes from fuel valve here to carburetor, disconnect that. So now we're gonna go ahead and take this 10 millimeter nut off right here, and then take the other 10 millimeter nut off here, and then we should be able to pull this carburetor back and off. And we'll snake this rubber piece out of there for the inner intake. So let me grab my wrench for the 10 here and a 10 here. Oh, one more thing I noticed is there is a breather tube here connected down, and in this case it connects to the air intake of the air intake tube. So this I'm going to disconnect right up here at the valve cover. And now and then one more thing is this vent tube and drain. This will need to get unrouted, pulled out, and that way that should be free. And now we should be able to gently kind of rock it and pull it off. So before I do that, one more thing I need to do, I notice, is I need to take this throttle slash, well, actually it's a choke cable, which goes from here. When you turn it to choke, it pulls on this choke lever, and then when you move it to run, it releases the tension on that. So this is an 8 mil, so I need to, actually what I could do is I'll just pull that out like so, and then I can just set that aside, and now I can pull the carb off. There is a throttle. Before I do that, I notice is there is a throttle cable here for the stepper motor. I need to pull the clip right in there, out and off. So let me do that real quick. I'm gonna set the camera down. Let me grab more of a needle nose to pinch those together to kind of help pop it out. There we go. So now I should be able to just pull it out like so. Now, just to make things a little bit easier, in this case, all it is there's a clip here right at the inverter, and we're going to disconnect this little clip so we can then set the carburetor completely aside. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So now that's unplugged from the inverter, I can go ahead and feed that out from underneath that breather, or yeah, breather tube. Well, in this case, it's a vent tube. Go ahead, pull this off, and we can take it off and set it aside. All right, so now what we are left with is the air box, and it looks like that will need to get taken off. So in order to take this off, I'm going to be gentle and just kind of slightly twist the screwdriver in there, and it just popped off. So slowly pull that out, and everything looks good. So we're gonna set this aside, and now we gotta get this air box off. And in order to do that, we have a 10 mil nut right there to pop this off. We'll pull the air filter out and off. I'm gonna set the nut just inside the air filter box, and then usually, so they actually have it installed right here with two 8mm 8mm bolts that are securing this air filter housing to this case housing. Now that I got my socket, it's an 8mm socket, I'm gonna sneak my extension in there, pull that bolt out, and we have one more. And unfortunately, this inverter is kind of in my way. So I'm gonna lift this inverter up and out of its little pocket and reach in and get that one off. And then this hose, this vent hose connects right here onto the pull starter housing. And I'm gonna just set this aside with the air filter. All right, so now we are just about there. Looks like we just gotta take the bolts off that are holding this pull starter assembly housing on. And let's go ahead and do that now. So there's 1, 2. So far these bolts are all looking the same. That one's really on there apparently. So let me grab my wrench over here. Break it loose. That one's looking the same. And I could reach that down there. That one's looking the same. Last one. See if I can kind of shift this over just a smidge to sneak my extension with my little wobbly on it. And that's one thing, you'll find me using this all the time, where it has the little wobbly on the end. You can see it's just a little bit beveled to make this so you can rotate it along. So this can stay flat, but I can get at more an angle type of scenario. All right, so pull that bolt out. So all those bolts look the same. And so now I should be able to gently pull the cover off, but it looks like I need to pull back a little bit more. So I'm gonna have to disconnect this cable down here on the inverter, this larger one down at the bottom. There we go. And then I can pull it out just enough, like so, to then be able to pull this hopefully back. But something is going on. So I wonder if that, oh, there we go. Okay, so it's just catching. So get this all the way off. All right, so we got her off. This is what the old one looked like. And basically the spring is just broken within. And since the spring's broken and it looks like it was used at an interesting angle, probably with the cover off, and so it wasn't guiding the pull rope through there. Or actually, no, what it looks like he did is, since the spring broke, he reached in here, he was probably rotating this by hand to get this pull cord to go all the retract as much as possible, kind of like what I'm doing right now, but I'm going to speed up the process. So basically he would do it very slowly and then pull this in hopes to get it started. That's what it looks like he was doing. So we're going to replace this with this one. So this is the new one. And everything's working as it should. When I pull on it, the cogs spin out as it should. So everything looks good. And everything looks good on here. And to take care of where this it looks like a pickup coil, just to check for timing, so it knows when to fire the igniter or give the igniter a signal to tell it when to fire this coil. This is the coil to the spark plug, and then down here's the igniter, which is covered in mud and stuff because it looks like this generator kind of sat in some mud. So I'm gonna go ahead and now snake this back on. And then this cable, there's a little notch right there. So we want to make sure that the cable remains in that notch. So now I have it held in place. I'm going to grab a couple screws and I'm going to gently and carefully keep everything held in place while I finger tight enough of these screws in place. So I'm gonna just kind of snug this one just ever gently, just to help keep that in place. Yeah, everything looks good there. And that way I can reach down here with both hands to get both of these nuts or bolts on. So it looks like we need to go this way a little bit and then get this other one. All right, so now that everything's in, all the bolts are in place, finger tight. That one's more, finger tight by snug. I can go ahead and get them all zinged up. All right, so now that those are all mounted, since I have a little bit more room, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this carburetor. Now, this carburetor, I need to make sure that this gasket is all good and everything looks good. I'm going to grab, and this gasket looks good. Most of the time, I am able to reuse all the gaskets. Rarely do I have to replace the gaskets, but I'm going to apply a little bit of Seafoam on there and a little Seafoam on there to clean that. Because it's important that the surface is clear of dirt and debris when reinstalling, because otherwise, if it is not, and you go to put it on and there's some dirt in between, since this is the intake tube between the car, well, they call it the insulator, and which is technically also an intake tube between the head and the carburetor. And if you have any kind of air leak between here or here, it will cause a lean condition, and we don't want that. So we're taking care to make sure everything is clean. And so let's go ahead and reinstall that. And get that seated in place. So now we'll go ahead and grab this carburetor. So this is the carburetor. This is the choke side. This is the throttle side. The throttle on these inverter style are generally controlled with a stepper motor, so they can, throttle always faces the head. So I'm making sure that this face is clean and this face or this surface is clean, and we can slide that back into place. Now the next thing is we have our air box. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall these two bolts, which I have set aside over here, and it goes on just like this. So let me grab my wrench, or not my wrench, but my socket, and then we'll get this started here, and this one started. I always like to start both because if you get one snugged up, it's going to be really hard to get the other one aligned. All right, so now we need to get our intake tube between here to this air filter reinstalled. So we're going to go ahead and grab that intake tube, which I actually have it all attached still here. So we're gonna double check this choke cable adjustment. So for now, I'm going to take this off just because it's going to be easier to do it all on here. So let's go ahead and loosen that up so that we can sneak that out. And then same, or on this, you still want to make sure everything's clean. You don't want to be ingesting dirt and all that kind of stuff. You could clean all this up. It's actually a good time to clean all this stuff up. It's not 100% necessary, but I mean, in the end, it doesn't hurt. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure everything is clean, no dirt, big dirt chunks or anything that's going to be pulled up and ingested into the system. We can clean up some of the stuff towards the end. So surface is clean on there. We're going to go ahead and pop this back into place and then grab the two 10mm nuts and get them both started. That one's on just enough to hold it. Same thing over here. Now, when I tighten up the carburetor ones, I like to do it by hand because I've seen too many people strip the studs that the carburetor is mounted onto. And so what I do is get it snug, where I just start to feel, you know, it getting snug. And then same thing on the other side, get it snug. And then don't do any more than a little turn like that. Do the same thing over here, little turn like that. Because you don't want to over torque it. That's like perfect. Never had any issues with them coming loose. Making sure this is all clean and clear before I put the breather tube back on, which then connects to this intake tube here. Now, make sure this is as clean as possible, and then reinstall this intake tube down into this air filter housing, like so. All right, we are going to clean all this up because there's looks like oil in here, probably because the customer may have tipped this over at some point in time, or there was just a little bit of, you know, seepage down in through here. But overall, this will all get cleaned up. One quick check I always like to do, which I forgot to mention earlier, and I didn't do it earlier, is once you get a few things this bolted down, it's always a good idea just to pull this over, make sure everything's working as it should and that it's cranking the engine over, and it is. So everything is good there. So we install the carburetor, put the air box back on. I already cleaned all of this just a little bit ago off camera, so air filter and all that is clean and ready to go back on. So might as well actually do that real quick. So I clean out the air filter and the air box, put that back on, put this cover back on. You basically hook it on the top here, pull down, and it's a 10mm bolt that screws in down here. So let me grab my wrench here, or socket, and snug that up. All right, then we also have this breather and drain tube. It routes right here on the side and then down into this hole right here. So that's the proper routing for that. So now let's go back up to the front here. We have our vent tube, which goes to part of the emissions control. This was connected right here So let's get that back into place. So that's good. Now we're going to get our inverter and control panel reinstalled. So we're going to gently move back over here. And the inverter, if you notice, there's two posts here. One here, and they both go into these two little holes. And they're rubber. So we're going to gently get those back into place. And then we got to get this harness reinstalled. Right there. So that's reinstalled. Make sure this inverter is in place, which something doesn't. Oh yeah, we're good. Okay. So don't want to forget about our throttle line, our throttle cable. It connects to the stepper motor, comes down, it routed underneath this and clipped right here onto the inverter. And then there's a little retainer that comes up and out, and that clipped right here onto the case. So that helps hold that back. So now that we have that installed, we're just double checking everything right here. I notice there's a little clip here that helps kind of retain the throttle cable wire. This is actually like a little extension. It actually connects from right here at this plug way over here. Let me grab a screwdriver to kind of point it out. So it connects actually right here. It's a little extension that comes up and over. There's a little clip right here that's holding, and then it clips into here. So that's where the throttle servo connects to, and then on that extension connects right there on the inverter. So now that should route back up. We'll lift this up and we can plug our fuel line back in to the carburetor, and then we'll pinch that and get that back past that barb like so. And then this clips right here on the case and retains like so. All right, so everything is looking good so far. All of that's looking good. So now we'll go ahead and get our choke cable reinstalled. So if I set this back on here, I had it off so it's facing up. These are all keyed. There's a little bevel there, or a round piece there, and everything else is square. So I know it goes on like this. Now if you look, if I turn this to choke, it pulls in. And then if I go to run, it extends it. So we'll connect this back onto this lever, or not lever, but mount. We'll feed it through there. And then on here, on the choke lever, if I rotate this, you can see that there's a little bit of a smaller hole here, and there's a bigger hole here. The bigger hole is where this ball fits into. So if you notice, it fits nicely there, and it doesn't right there. And that's kind of the retainer. So you want the bigger end over here. It goes like this. Over on the top, you drop that in there, and then you can pull it back so you can see it connect in like so. And the spring just gently seats inside there and holds it like so. So now we'll make sure this is properly adjusted. So in the choke position, that's choke, we pull this out just enough to make sure this is fully choked. And it looks like that is basically fully choked. Now I'm going to just snug this. I need to make sure I put my 8mm socket on here. I'm going to just snug this. And then what I'm doing is when I take it to run position, I want to make sure this gets completely lax in that this choke is completely off. And now if I go past run, it shouldn't move. And so it's not. So if I hit, I'm at run right now, and I go to choke, that's basically fully choked. And then go to run, it's out of choke, and we're good to go. That's how you properly adjust the choke on that. So now, we make sure this is routed back under here, like so, and we can finish putting this back together. So now we're left with our gas tank. So let's see here how this routed. So this fuel line routed underneath this line here. So I gonna have to kind of snake this down and through without unclipping it, because this gas tank is pretty full. And then if you look over here, I got it just under. We're going to put it back into that fuel valve, and then I'm going to make sure that retainer's back in place. Now I can let go of that, and then just make sure that's unpinched. And now it is in place. Okay, so other thing we got to do is that we took off is this evap canister. We got to reconnect it. That's what came off of that was connected right here to the, it connects to the air filter housing to here, and now back onto here, making sure that the mount, because it mounts right in here like that, behind the cover, and then make sure that's in. Roll over it to retain that hose. And now it's just putting the case back on. This is where it gets interesting, because we have to line this up, these two nubs up on the inside, right here and here. It can take a little bit of finagling. We gotta get the inverter also aligned right here. And then the same thing on the other side. It's the exact same thing. But before we do that, we need to get the charcoal canister reinstalled right here on the inside of this cover. Pinching the clamp together, put the screw in there. I'm gonna try to hold it together as I get it reinstalled onto this housing, which can be kind of a real pain if you're doing it by yourself. Here, can you open that? There we go. Now that's installed. Okay. So usually what I like to do is get the bolts in down here, do the same thing on the other side, and then try to sandwich everything back together. So I'm gonna lightly screw in these bolts. They're not going to be screwed down all the way. They're just going to be just so to help hold everything, because otherwise you'll need like a bazillion hands. Let's see here, making sure, yeah. There we go. I got one in the center. I'll get that one just started. There we go, that one's starting. I had to like push this up because they were just slightly out of alignment. And then same gig on this side. It looks like I might have it there. There we go, got that started. Okay, now we'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm gonna pull this hose up a little bit because I had a little low. There is a hole right here that'll pop out of. So I'm just gonna pop it up and then I'll push it back in once I get those started, just so I'm not pushing against it and fighting to try to get these aligned. There we go. Get these started. A little bit of dirt that's catching on. There we go. There's so much dirt. There we go. Because it's kind of cupped. It kind of cups up into place. This one also has some dirt. There we go, that one started. Okay, so now I'm gonna pop this hose, breather tube slash drain tube back down and through. And it's just popping out right there. Okay, so now we got those in place. We're going to go ahead and make sure right here, the inverter is getting in place. So there's a nub there like I showed earlier. You can kind of see it right there. Right there, and then exact same thing on the other side, which is actually much harder to show on camera, unfortunately. And then we also have to deal with this tank. And the tank, this is where it gets kind of interesting, because the tank has to sit in its little spots. So you basically pick a side, get it into its spot, one here and one over here, and I just felt it pop into place. This though has to sit on top, so this sits up and over, but I got to make sure the tank gets into place. And then without trying to pop it out, also got to get this rubber gasket up and over because the tank sits high. If you look right here, before I close this, You got to make sure this breather tube is kind of tucked and wrapped and routed in place, because you'll see, go ahead and come over on this side. You'll see, goes breather tube up, over, and down. That's how it routes. But I didn't route it in there until I got it seating, the tank seating in a spot on both sides on this side. So you want to do it on this side first primarily, just to make it easier on you to make sure that's routed and sitting in place. And then you can hopefully kind of get this as close to installed as close to as possible. There we go. And then get this. Got to get this. I'm gonna hold my hand up here to help keep it together, to not allow this tank to kind of pop out of place over there as best as possible. And I got to get this aligned, and I feel that the opening is right here, but the tank is sitting that way a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can reach my finger in here to help. Thank you. And see if I can get it pushed up and in place. That's where these become a little tricky. Let's see if I can see. So yeah, it still needs to go back. Can't really pull on that. It's so close. This is where it just becomes kind of a pain. So still, oop. So this needs to okay, so it's just one spot, and it's right under here. That's not lined up. It is so close, but yet so far. Let's see here. Okay. So I'm gonna loosen this up. I'm gonna pop this one off in hopes I can get a little bit more movement. Yeah, there we go. There we go. And then that pops in place. Okay, hold on. Make sure it's seated 100% over here. This end popped out. So that's where this thing just becomes kind of a pain. Okay, if you can hold that there. I'm gonna take this bottom one bolt off in hopes that I can kind of rock this around a little bit more. Okay. There we go. I felt it pop in. Okay. Now, why is this not? It's like something's hidden. Oh, I see. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna hold in order to lock this in place so it doesn't undo. You can see that there's threads on this side and this side. That means the bolt or the screw goes in this side. So over here, let me grab the 2 screws. Make sure they're no different. And it looks like all the screws are the same on this. Okay, so let me change my head of my little impact. And then I'm gonna set one in here. And gently, oh, here's a regular screwdriver. I don't like using the impact yet when threading in things because you have a great chance of cross threading because you can't feel it if there's a change in resistance. Okay, so got those snug, making sure this is all routed in here. All that looks good. That will seat down like so. And then now we kind of button it up. So now that I got that held in place, I got to get this bolt back in down this lower part of the case. So this needs to sit up. There we go. Got that snug. And then rotate this around. Do the same thing where we took this one out to kind of help move the case around. There we go. All right. So we got 2 more screws. You can see on this side here, it's a deep hole. You don't see the threads closest to you, but yet if you rotate around, you can see the threads closest to you. Don't put the screw in this way because it's not going to do you anything. It's not going to do you any good. Put it in from this side to connect into those threads. That way it holds the casing together. So we're going to go ahead and try to get the main screws for the casing all in but loose, because it's so much easier to tighten them all up once they're in but loose to align everything. So now we got the 3 bolts installed here, the 2 screws here on this side, the 2 screws up here on that side, along with the 3 bolts here. We can now tighten everything up. So now I can switch over to my impact. I'll do the bolts down low first. Those are all 10 mil. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom on this side. And now switch over to the Phillips. For the Phillips screws, there's this one right here. And then flip this around. You don't need to go crazy on these. There we go. So that's gaskets all in place, looking good. Now we got to get this front control panel reinstalled. How it connects is you got these 2 little hooks right here. That needs to go in first. And then not to mention, don't forget, there's actually 2 pieces right here and 2 over here that also hold in. So you'll have to kind of sandwich everything like so. And then hold it in place, get a couple screws in, finger tight, just snug I should say, and then go down below, do the same thing. That was overhanging, so I had to kind of push it up because everything's kind of like, just kind of almost like a big bubble in a way. So getting this one in, snug, or not snug, but just enough to hold that in place. Now get the other 2 in. And now we can snug it. So, and then there we go. Okay, so now we got to put the backside on. Same gig, got the 2 little clips there. I have one here, goes in kind of on top. This side's a little easier, has a tendency to line up a little easier because over here on this side you have this rubber gasket that likes to push things apart. So we'll get our 4 screws started. Actually it's 6. There's 2 here in the middle too. All right, so now that that's in place, we can go ahead and close up this side. This wire is for the pickup. No, that's for, okay, so that's tucked behind there in that harness there. Everything looks good here. So we are now going to install this cover. So to install this cover, we need to take care that when we install it, that we're not rubbing against this hose. So we may have to put it underneath, we may have to put it above. I don't know which. So we're gonna pull the old cover off. Wow, that's really on there. That's really on there. Oh, jeez. Let's see if I can get the lower one. Oh, I hate that. All right, so what I'm gonna do, since those are really on there, I am going to get a socket with my wrench, and I'm going to see if I can put pressure down in hopes that I can break it loose without damaging those screws. So let me get a correct socket for that. And the socket I'm using is 1/4 inch. And then what I got to do is push down. There we go, we got it broken. And then, oh yes, okay. Sometimes you have to drill them out, which I really hate doing, but those were really on there. And the biggest thing is you got to put a lot of pressure on it, and you just got to be really careful. Hopefully you can get them off. You might be able to apply some heat, but there's so much plastic and stuff, I would be a little bit worried. Okay, so this is going to be sitting like this. I have a feeling this is going to have to go under. So we'll pull this under and make sure this goes through. First we'll pull the pole starter head through, and then pull the plate through like so. And then with it sitting on here, what I'm doing is I'm looking down in here and I'm making sure that it's not rubbing against that. And it looks like it'll be just fine. It's not gonna rub on it at all when I pull it through here like this. Now, if I had it on top, this hose would have been pushing up against this pole starter rope, and it would have messed up that evap hose. All right, so now we will pop this cover back in place. There's 2 nubs here that need to go into here. Oh, 3, sorry. There's a 3rd one for the middle. They need to go in at an angle, and then you can put this up in place. We're going to go ahead and snug these screws. I always start them by hand just to make sure that they are starting, and then I can take this and gently lock them in place. That one looks like someone already started to kind of, there we go. Okay, now we can get this installed. Do note there is 2 ways you can put it. You can put it on that way, but if you notice, this is slightly angled and it's just not the proper direction. So make sure it's angled in properly, and that's right. So now we can get our 2 screws installed for the pole starter. And then we can lock them in place. We can fully tie. There we go. There we go. All right, so we can now go ahead and attempt to fire this up. We have not fired this machine up because the pole rope would not retract. So before I start up anything, the biggest thing I always do is check oil and check fuel. So to check oil on these things, I'm gonna blow, I don't want any dirt to get down in there. So I'm gonna clean up around this. There we go. And then I'm gonna pull this off, making sure this is level. And we're gonna check our oil level, and it is full. It is exactly full. And on these, technically you can't overfill unless you tip this thing over and then fill it, put the cap on, and that's how you can overfill it. But if you do overfill it, just tip it like this, let whatever extra drain out, and technically full is right here to the threads. A lot of these that are low like this, full is right here to the threads. Also, you can tell when I put this dipstick on here, don't screw it down, pull it out, and you can see it's right here at the full mark. So we'll go ahead and put this back on, clean up this little bit of oil here. And then one more thing I do is I check fuel. This up. And all I'm doing is when I look down in there is I'm checking to see if there's any kind of debris, any kind of looks like layers in there. Sometimes these are hard to see. You won't be able to see it on the camera on this one, unfortunately, but everything looks good. I'm not seeing any kind of layering in there, and the fluids look good. So now we're gonna go ahead and attempt to fire this up. So fire this thing up. We need to turn this into the choke position. Economy mode is off, and now we can pull it. Move it to run, and it looks like it's running. So hit eco mode on, it's going to eco mode. So one last thing I like to do before I sign off on this, we always check for voltage and frequency regardless of lights or regardless of displays. That way I know absolutely sure that when the customer gets the machine that everything is good to go. So I'm going to grab my little extension cord, my heat gun, because I also want to test for load. And I found that the heat gun is probably the best way that you can test for a decent load, because the heat gun's rated at, this particular heat gun is rated for 1500 watts. And doing little lights and stuff, I mean, you're only going to get, you know, a few watts. So it's not a really good load test. All right, so we have it plugged in. And it looks like our voltage and frequency is good. I'm going to switch over to watts. And then I'm going to hook up our heat gun. Now turn it on high. We're currently in eco mode on. And now that's high. And basically 1500 watts. I'll put it at half. And then off. And then I'm also going to turn off eco mode. Then I turn it on high. Off. And everything looks good. So, oh, one thing though I noticed, if you remember, if you were catching it, I didn't tighten this up because I just set it on there when we were doing a couple tests earlier. So I need to put that on and tighten down the screw. And when I tighten the screws on there, don't, you know, get it snug, but don't go cranking on it. Just do a little, like once you get it snug, do a little turn, just a little turn. And that's plenty, because you don't want to strip out that screw. If you strip out that screw, it's a big pain in the butt. So anyway, now all we got to do is put these covers back on, and it should be good to go. So let me put this on, this here. Actually, I'm just gonna leave that off for a sec, but get all of this in place, get this started. See, some of the screws, they're kind of boogered up for them. Customer taking this off, and I think that's why he left it off. Probably because he was having to take it on and off a whole bunch of times. So then get that locked in place. So everything is good now. So overall, that's how you replace the pull starter assembly on these generators. Only thing left that we have on this is I'm going to clean it real quick, and then we have a gas cap on order. This particular cap, the head of it is all messed up, and so we ordered a new one. It's supposed to come in within the next few days, but outside of that, this is good to go.